It was supposed to be a weekend camping, until a drone found their tent 19 years later. The drone's whine was a mosquito in the vast, indifferent cathedral of the Oregon woods. For hours, it had been a remote, almost unheard annoyance to the handful of hikers on the lower trails of Mount Hood, a mechanical insect buzzing just at the edge of hearing. But for its operator, a hobbyist named Ben Carter, perched on a rocky outcrop miles away, the drone was an extension of his own eyes. He was painting the landscape with its lens, capturing the impossible greens and the deep, wounded purples of the ravines for a short film about the Pacific Northwest's melancholic beauty. The afternoon light was failing, turning the fir trees into jagged black silhouettes against a bruised apricot sky. Ben was about to call it a day. His fingers were numb, and the drone's battery indicator was blinking a petulant red. He guided it into a final sweeping arc over a dense, untrailed section of the forest, a place where the map was just a blank, green void. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a flicker of unnatural color against the forest floors. Tapestry of decay. A patch of faded, sickly blue. Ben frowned, nudging the joystick. The drone dipped lower, its camera struggling to focus through the thick canopy. He thought it might be a tarp, maybe some trash left by careless campers, a sadly common sight. But as the drone descended, weaving through the ancient branches like a hummingbird, the shape resolved itself. It wasn't just a tarp, it was a tent, or what was left of one. The blue nylon was shredded, clinging to the collapsed poles like rotted flesh to a skeleton. Moss and grime had colonized it, turning the once vibrant fabric into a mottled, leprous thing. It was half swallowed by the earth, buried under 19 years of fallen pine needles and creeping vegetation. A small Douglas fir, no thicker than a man's wrist, had speared straight through the center of it, a final, brutal punctuation mark. The sight was jarring, a weird little slash of human failure in the middle of pristine wilderness. Ben felt a prickle of irritation. He hated seeing the wild desecrated like this. He maneuvered the drone for a closer look, preparing to log the GPS coordinates for the Forest Service to clean up later. The camera glided over the wreckage. The tent's zipper flap was torn open, a gaping mouth, and inside, nestled amongst the mold and the dark, damp debris, was something else. Something that didn't belong. Ben leaned closer to his monitor, his breath fogging the screen. It was a backpack, a Jansport, its once bright red fabric, now the color of a dried bloodstain. Its main compartment was unzipped, spilling its contents like entrails. A water bottle, a paperback book with a warped, pulpy cover, and something else. A small, leather-bound journal. A strange, cold feeling, entirely different from the evening chill, washed over Ben. This wasn't just litter. This was a time capsule, a scene of abandonment. He felt a voyeuristic thrill mixed with a sense of dread, like a child peeking through a keyhole at something he shouldn't see. He pushed the drone's camera to its maximum zoom, the image pixelating slightly. The journal was open. The pages were stiff and yellowed, stained with water spots that blurred the ink, but he could make out a few words, written in a looping, feminine hand. "He's watching us. I know he is." The battery alarm on Ben's controller let out a shrill, insistent beep. He ignored it. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He panned the camera away from the backpack, across the rotted floor of the tent. His gaze snagged on a dark shape half buried in the muck near the back. It was a boot, a hiking boot, a single mud-caked boot, its laces still tied, and protruding from its opening was the unmistakable skeletal shape of a human foot. Ben jerked back from the screen as if he'd been electrocuted. The controller slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the rock. The drone, its connection severed, hovered for a moment, its whine turning into a high-pitched scream of technological protest, before it began its automated, slow descent. But Ben didn't see it. He was scrambling for his phone, his fingers fumbling, his mind a white-hot static of panic. He was no longer a filmmaker, he was a witness. The call to the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office was a garbled, breathless mess. Ben's words tumbled out, disjointed and frantic. A tent, a body, old. 19 years, he'd later learn the media would scream. 19 years. The dispatcher, a calm, steady voice in the storm of his panic, took down the GPS coordinates and assured him a team would be mobilized at first light. It was too dark, too dangerous to send anyone in tonight. Ben spent the night in his truck, parked at the trailhead, the drone's footage playing on a loop on his laptop. The image of that skeletal foot burned into his retinas. He couldn't sleep. Every creak of the trees, every rustle in the undergrowth, was the sound of something terrible. The forest was no longer beautiful. It was a tomb. By dawn, the area was a swarm of official vehicles, sheriff's deputies, search and rescue volunteers in their bright orange jackets, and a forensics team from the state police. The air, once clean and crisp with the scent of pine, was now thick with the smell of exhaust and the grim, quiet purpose of men who dealt with death for a living. Ben, wrapped in a borrowed blanket and sipping a cup of scalding, bitter coffee, felt like an outsider, a ghost at a funeral. He had shown them the footage, pointed out the location on a map, and now, he was useless. He watched as two deputies, their faces grim, consulted with a grizzled SAR team leader. One of them was Detective Miles Corbin, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with a weary disappointment in the human race. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper buzz cut and eyes that had seen too much. He listened to Ben's story again, his gaze unwavering, his expression unreadable. "You're sure about the foot?" Corbin asked, his voice a low rumble. Ben just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The team went in. The hours that followed were an agonizing crawl. Ben stayed at the makeshift command post, unable to leave. He felt tethered to the scene, bound by the secret he had uncovered. He watched the deputies' faces, trying to read their expressions as they communicated over the radio. But their voices were clipped, professional, devoid of emotion. It was late afternoon when they brought her out. They had cleared a small landing zone for a helicopter, and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of its blades echoed through the valley. A sound of grim finality. They carried her in a black body bag, a long, anonymous shape, strapped to a Stokes litter. As they passed by, just for a second, the wind caught the corner of the bag's zipper, pulling it open by a few inches. Ben caught a glimpse of what was inside. It wasn't just a skeleton. There was skin, leathery, desiccated, and the color of old parchment, and hair. A long, matted tangle of dark brown hair, still attached to a skull. The image was so grotesque, so profoundly wrong, that Ben had to turn away, his stomach heaving. The coffee came up, burning his throat. Until there was nothing left but dry, racking sobs. When he finally looked up, gasping for breath, Detective Corbin was standing in front of him, holding out a bottle of water. "You did the right thing, son," Corbin said, his voice softer than before. "Who was she?" Ben whispered, his voice hoarse. Corbin's face hardened again. "We don't know yet, but we found the journal, and a wallet." He paused, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods as if the trees themselves were suspects. Her name was Jessica Miller. College ID from the University of Oregon. Dated 2006. 19 years. The number echoed in Ben's head. 19 years she had lain there, just a few miles from a busy highway, while the world moved on. While her family wandered, while her friends grew up, got married, had children, while the person who did this to her walked free. Was she alone? Ben asked, dreading the answer. Corbin's silence was answer enough. He didn't need to say that the initial search of the tent had only uncovered one set of remains. He didn't need to say that the other person from that camping trip, the one whose name was probably also in that waterlogged journal, was still missing. Or worse, the forensics report came back a week later, and the details were a brutalist poem of violence. Jessica Miller had not died of exposure. The hyoid bone in her neck had been fractured. She had been strangled. There were other injuries, too. Defensive wounds on her forearms, her ulnar and radius bones showing evidence of healed fractures from weeks, maybe even months, before her death. She had been abused, terrorized, and then murdered. But the most chilling discovery was something they found on the rotted nylon of the tent itself. near the torn zipper flap. It was a handprint, a partial print, preserved by a freak combination of sap and 19 years of weather. It was faint, the ridges and whorls barely visible, but it was there, and it didn't belong to Jessica Miller. The print was larger, the fingers thicker. It was a man's print. The discovery of Jessica Miller's body and the manner of her death ripped open a cold case that had long been relegated to a dusty file cabinet. The media descended on the story like vultures, splashing Jessica's smiling, bright-eyed college photo across every screen. She was a ghost from another era, a girl from the age of flip phones and dial-up internet, resurrected into the harsh glare of the 24-hour news cycle, and with her, another name was resurrected. The name of the boy she had gone camping with that weekend. The boy who had been the prime suspect from the very beginning, Liam Evans. The news hit the quiet, affluent suburbs of Lake Oswego like a shockwave. It traveled through manicured lawns and pristine craftsman-style homes, whispered over coffee at high-end cafes and discussed in hushed tones at the local country club, because Liam Evans wasn't missing. He hadn't been for years. He was right there, living among them. He was now Dr. Liam Evans, a respected pediatric surgeon, a pillar of the community. He was married to a beautiful woman, the daughter of a state senator. He had 2 perfect children, a boy and a girl, who attended the best private school in the city. He lived in a sprawling modern house with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Willamette River. He coached his son's Little League team. He donated generously to charity. He was the man everyone admired, the man everyone trusted with their children's lives. And 19 years ago, he had gone on a camping trip with his girlfriend, Jessica Miller, and had come back alone, claiming she had run off after a fight. He had scratches on his face and arms, which he'd attributed to a fall. He had seemed distraught, confused. The police had questioned him for days, but there was no body, no weapon, no evidence. Just the word of a scared, heartbroken boy against the empty space where a girl used to be. Eventually, the case went cold. The questions faded, and Liam Evans had built a new life, a perfect life, on a foundation of secrets and lies. The news of the drone's discovery reached him on a Tuesday morning. In the sterile, quiet hallway of the Children's Hospital, he was scrubbing in for a complex heart surgery on a newborn baby. A nurse, her face pale, held up a tablet with a news alert on the screen. The headline was a punch to the gut: remains found on Mount Hood, identified as Jessica Miller, missing. Since 2006, Liam stared at the screen, his hands dripping water into the stainless steel sink. The world around him seemed to recede, the sounds of the hospital, the beeping monitors, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the distant cry of a child fading into a dull roar. He saw her face, Jessica's face. Not the smiling photo on the screen, but her real face, twisted in terror, her eyes wide with betrayal. He could feel the damp earth under his knees, the rough bark of the tree against his back. He could smell the pine and the fear. "Dr. Evans," the nurse asked, her voice trembling slightly, "are you all right?" Liam looked at his hands, the hands of a healer, the hands that saved lives. He flexed his fingers, watching the muscles move under his skin. He remembered the feeling of her throat, the delicate, bird-like bones giving way under his pressure. He had been so strong then, so full of rage. He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up, his face a mask of calm, professional concern. "I'm fine," he said, his voice steady, betraying none of the chaos raging inside him. "Just a shock. She was a friend. A long time ago." He turned off the water and reached for a sterile towel. "Let's not keep the patient waiting." As he walked into the operating room, the bright, unforgiving lights glaring down, he felt a cold, familiar certainty settle over him. They had found her, but they would never find him. The boy who had killed Jessica Miller was gone, buried even deeper than her body had been. In his place was Dr. Liam Evans, and Dr. Liam Evans was untouchable. The handprint on the tent, it meant nothing. He'd been there, of course his print was there. They had nothing. It was a ghost story. And he was the only one who knew how it really ended. He picked up the scalpel, its cold, steel weight a familiar comfort in his hand. The past was the past. And he had a life to save. The irony was not lost on him. It was, in fact, his greatest protection. The media frenzy was a predictable storm of recycled facts and breathless speculation. Jessica Miller was resurrected as a tragic angel. Her life story flattened into a two-dimensional narrative of innocence, lost. She was the bright, bubbly sorority girl, the aspiring journalist, the girl with the infectious laugh and the world. At her feet, she was perfect. She was a victim, and every victim needs a villain. Liam Evans was cast in the role with chilling ease. His pristine life was no longer a testament to his success, but a facade, a carefully constructed lie. His photo, a professional headshot from the hospital's website, was juxtaposed with Jessica's smiling college picture. His face, handsome and confident, now looked sinister, predatory. The media narrative wrote itself. The golden boy with a dark secret, the monster hiding in plain sight. The Doctor of Death, one particularly lurid tabloid, dubbed him. Reporters camped outside his house, their long-lensed cameras aimed at his windows like sniper rifles. They ambushed him in the hospital parking garage, shouting questions he refused to answer. "Dr. Evans, did you kill Jessica Miller? Why did you lie to the police? What are you hiding?" He moved through the storm with an unnerving calm, his jaw set, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his expensive suit a suit of armor. He hired the best lawyer in Portland, a shark named Marcus Thorne, who issued a terse, dismissive statement decrying the media witch hunt and reaffirming his client's innocence. But behind the locked doors of his multi-million-dollar home, the facade was cracking. His wife, Claire, a woman who had married him for his ambition and his pedigree, now looked at him with a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was a senator's daughter. She understood the importance of appearances, the devastating power of a scandal. "You have to say something, Liam," she insisted one night, her voice tight with anxiety. They were in their cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling below them like a fallen constellation. "People think you're a monster. They can think whatever they want," Liam said, his voice flat. He was staring into the fireplace, at the clean, gas-fed flames that produced no ash, no mess. "There's no evidence, it's just noise. A girl is dead, Liam, your girlfriend. And they found her body on a mountain where you left her. That's not noise, that's a goddamn symphony." "She wasn't my girlfriend," he snapped, his composure finally breaking. He turned to face her, his eyes cold and hard. "Not at the end." Claire flinched, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She had never seen this side of him, this flash of ice-cold rage. The man she knew was patient, gentle, kind. The man standing in front of her was a stranger. "What does that mean?" she whispered. Liam's face softened, the mask slipping back into place. He walked over to her, taking her hands in his. His touch was cool. "It means it was a long time ago. Claire, we were kids, we fought, it was stupid. I left, and I never saw her again. That's the truth. It was the truth then, and it's the truth now." He squeezed her hands. "You have to believe me." She wanted to, desperately. Her entire life, her social standing, her children's future, it was all built on the foundation of the man he was supposed to be. To doubt him was to doubt everything. So she nodded, a slow, hesitant gesture. "Okay," she said, the word tasting like a lie in her own mouth. "Okay." While Liam was fighting to save his present, Detective Miles Corbin was digging into his past. The discovery of Jessica's body had reawakened something in him, a dogged, relentless determination that had been worn down by years of bureaucratic bullshit and unsolved cases. This one felt different. It felt personal. He remembered the original investigation, the frustration, the dead ends. He remembered the look on Liam Evans's face, back then. Not grief, not exactly fear, but it was the fear of being caught, not the fear of loss. Corbin had known it in his gut, but he could never prove it. Now, he had a second chance. He started with the journal. It was a forensic nightmare. The pages warped, and the ink bled into illegible Rorschach blots. But a specialist at the State Crime Lab, a woman with the patience of a saint and a lab full of futuristic-looking equipment, was able to work a miracle. Using infrared imaging and digital enhancement, she began to painstakingly reconstruct the faded text, letter by letter. Corbin also started tracking down the people who had known Jessica and Liam back in college. Their friends, their classmates, their professors. It was like archaeological work, digging through the sediment of 19 years. People's memories were faded, distorted by time and nostalgia. But patterns began to emerge. Everyone remembered Jessica as vibrant and kind. But in the months leading up to her disappearance, she had changed. She had become withdrawn, quiet, anxious. She had lost weight. She had started wearing long-sleeved shirts, even in the spring heat. Several friends recalled seeing bruises on her arms, which she'd brushed off as clumsiness. And Liam. Everyone remembered Liam. Ambitious, driven, charming, but there was another side to him. A side that only a few people had seen. A possessive, controlling streak. A terrifying temper that could flare up over the smallest thing. One of Jessica's sorority sisters, a woman named Sarah, who was now a harried suburban mum, told Corbin a story that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was at a party, Sarah said, her voice low, as if she were afraid of being overheard, even after all these years. Jess was talking to some guy from her English class. Just talking, laughing. Liam saw them from across the room. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, grabbed her by the arm, and dragged her out of there. The look on his face, it was pure rage. The guy she was talking to, he tried to say something, and Liam just looked at him and said, "Stay away from her. She's mine." It was chilling. Corbin found the guy from the English class. His name was Ethan. He was a high school teacher now, with thinning hair and a gentle, sad smile. He remembered the incident vividly. "I was worried about her," Ethan told Corbin, his eyes full of a 19-year-old regret. "She seemed trapped." The next day in class, I asked her if she was okay. She wouldn't look at me. She just said, "You need to pretend you don't know me. It's safer for you." And after that, she never spoke to me again. He shook his head, his gaze distant. "I should have done something. I should have told someone, but I was a kid. I was scared of him. Everyone was scared of him." That was the common thread. But there was one person who wasn't just scared. There was one person who had seen more than just a possessive boyfriend and a few bruises. There was a third person on that mountain, a hidden witness. Her name was Maya. She had been Jessica's roommate. A quiet, artsy girl who had always lived in Jessica's shadow. She was the one who had helped Jessica pack for that camping trip. She was the one who had seen the look in Jessica's eyes that morning, not excitement, but a deep, gut-wrenching dread. "He'll kill me if I don't go," Jessica had whispered to her, her voice trembling as she stuffed a sleeping bag into its sack. "He said he just wants to talk, to fix things." On the mountain, where it all started, Maya had begged her not to go. But Jessica had been convinced that this one trip, this one grand gesture, was the only way to either fix the broken, toxic thing their relationship had become, or to finally end it. She had made Maya promise not to tell anyone where they were going. "It'll just make him angrier," she'd said. After a week had passed with no word, Maya had broken her promise. She had gone to the police. She had told them about Liam's temper, about the bruises, about Jessica's fear, but her story had been dismissed as the hysterical ramblings of a dramatic college student. Liam, the clean-cut, pre-med student from a good family, was so much more believable. He had cried, he had seemed broken. And Maya, with her black-dyed hair and her piercings, had looked like a troublemaker. They hadn't listened. The guilt had eaten her alive. It had hollowed her out, turning her into a ghost long before Jessica's body was ever found. She had dropped out of school, moved across the country, changed her name. She had tried to outrun the memory of her friend's terrified face, the sound of her own voice, unheard and disbelieved. Now, she was living in a small, dusty town in Arizona, working as a potter. her hands constantly covered in clay, as if she were trying to mold a new life for herself from the earth. She was in her late 30s, but she looked older. Her hair was shot through with gray, and her eyes, the color of faded denim, were haunted. She saw the news on a small television in the corner of a local diner. Jessica's face filled the screen, and for a moment, Maya couldn't breathe. The past she had tried to bury had been exhumed. She saw Liam's face, too older, harder, but instantly recognizable. Dr. Liam Evans, a healer. The irony was so grotesque, so obscene, that she felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat that night. She sat in her small, cluttered studio, the smell of wet clay and turpentine filling the air. She pulled out an old, dusty box from under her bed. Inside, nestled among faded photographs and college mementos, was a small, cheap, disposable camera. The kind you bought at a drugstore for $5. Jessica had given it to her the day before the camping trip. "Take pictures of everything while I'm gone," she'd said with a sad, forced smile. "So, I can see what a normal weekend looks like when I get back." Maya had taken a few random silly pictures, a shot of her cat, a picture of her own paint-splattered sneakers. But on the day Jessica was supposed to come back, when the dread in Maya's gut had become a physical ache, she had done something else. She had driven to the trailhead at Mount Hood. She had been too scared to go up the trail herself, too afraid of what she might find, or who might find her. But she had seen Liam's car, a dark green Jeep Cherokee, parked near the entrance, and she had waited. Hours later, she saw him. He was walking out of the woods, alone. His clothes were torn, and there were deep, angry scratches on his face and arms. But it was the look in his eyes that she would never forget. It wasn't grief. It wasn't panic. It was a look of cold, triumphant finality. He had looked like a predator walking away from a kill, her hands shaking. Maya had lifted the cheap plastic camera, and, from behind the cover of a thicket of ferns, she had taken a picture. Just one. The click of the shutter had sounded like a gunshot in the silent woods. Liam's head had snapped up, his eyes scanning the trees, and for a terrifying second, Maya thought he had seen her. She had ducked down, her heart pounding, and had stayed there, hidden, until he had gotten in his Jeep and driven away. She had never gotten the film developed. She had been too afraid. Afraid of what the picture would show. Afraid of what Liam would do if he ever found out. Afraid that no one would believe her anyway. The camera, with its single terrible image trapped inside, had become a talisman of her guilt, a secret she had carried for 19 years. Now, sitting in her studio, the desert wind rattling her window, Maya looked at the camera. The world hadn't believed her then, but the world had also seen what was left of Jessica Miller. The world had seen the handprint on the tent. The world was finally ready to listen. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number for the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. When a voice answered, she took a deep breath. "My name is Maya," she said, her own voice sounding strange and distant to her ears. "I was Jessica Miller's roommate. I think I have something you need to see." The call from Maya, now living under the name Chloe Peters, landed on Detective Corbin's desk like a grenade. He listened, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone, while she recounted the story she had tried to tell 19 years ago. The fear in Jessica's voice, the dread, the trip to the trailhead, the sight of Liam emerging from the woods alone, and the photograph. "You took a picture." Corbin's voice was tight, trying to contain the surge of adrenaline. "And you never developed it?" "I was 20 years old and terrified." Maya's voice crackled over the line, thin and reedy with age and regret. "He was rich and powerful even then. His family had connections. The cops, they looked at me like I was trash. Who were they going to believe?" "We'll believe you now," Corbin said, his voice a low, firm promise. "Where is the camera?" An evidence technician was on a plane to Arizona the next morning. The disposable camera, a relic from a bygone era, was treated with the reverence of a holy artifact. It was flown back to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab, where the delicate 19-year-old film was carefully removed from its plastic casing in a pitch-black darkroom. The process was agonizingly slow. The film was brittle, the emulsion fragile. One mistake, one crack, and the image could be lost forever. While the lab worked its magic, the pressure on Liam Evans was becoming unbearable. The story of the hidden witness had leaked to the press, and the media frenzy escalated from a storm to a hurricane. His face was everywhere, his life dissected in excruciating detail on cable news panels and true crime podcasts. The hospital, bowing to the relentless pressure, placed him on an indefinite leave of absence. His carefully constructed world was crumbling, brick by brick. His wife, Claire, was no longer asking him to believe her. She was watching him. Her eyes, once full of adoration, were now cold and analytical, like the eyes of a stranger. She saw the way his hand trembled when he thought no one was looking. She heard him muttering in his sleep, fragmented words that made no sense. The woods. She wouldn't listen. Mine. The betrayals came swiftly. Friends stopped returning. His calls. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid him. The parents of the children on his little league team quietly petitioned to have him removed as coach. He was a pariah, a leper in his own life. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had spent 2 decades building an empire of respectability, and it was being dismantled in a matter of days by whispers and shadows. His antagonist was no longer just the ghost of Jessica Miller. It was the entire world. He felt their judgment like a physical weight, a crushing pressure on his chest. He grew bolder in his denials, more arrogant. He agreed to a televised interview with a high-profile journalist, against the strenuous objections of his lawyer. He was convinced he could control the narrative, that his charm and intelligence would win people over. It was a disaster. He sat in a plush armchair, under the hot glare of the studio lights, his face a mask of practiced sincerity. He spoke of Jessica with a sad, wistful fondness, painting a picture of a troubled young woman who had simply walked away from her life. He was calm, articulate, believable, but the journalist was relentless. "Dr. Evans," she said, her voice sharp and precise, "several of Jessica's friends have described you as possessive, controlling. One even used the word violent. How do you respond to that?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Liam's face before he smoothed it away. "We're young," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We were passionate. All couples fight. It was nothing more than that." And the bruises they saw on her arms. "Jess was clumsy," he said, the lie slipping out with practiced ease. "She was always bumping into things." The journalist leaned forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "And the camping trip? Why there? Why that spot?" "It was special to us," Liam said, his voice taking on a softer, more sentimental tone. "It was where we first said, we loved each other." The lie was so audacious, so grotesque, that in a small, darkened viewing room at the crime lab, Detective Corbin felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He was watching the interview with the lab technician, the one who had been working on the photograph. "That son of a bitch," Corbin muttered, clenching his fists. "He's going to walk. We've got nothing but circumstantial bullshit and a 19-year-old story from a scared witness." The technician, a quiet woman named Alice, didn't look up from her computer screen. She was meticulously cleaning up the digital scan of the photograph, adjusting the contrast, sharpening the focus. "Maybe not," she said softly. She clicked her mouse, and the image on her monitor expanded, filling the screen. It was grainy, slightly out of focus, the colors washed out by time, but it was unmistakable. It was Liam Evans, 19 years younger, standing at the edge of the woods. His face was turned towards the camera, his eyes wide with alarm, as if he'd just heard the click of the shutter. His hair was wild, his shirt was torn at the shoulder, and on his cheek were 3 parallel lines. Deep, angry, bleeding scratches. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was what he was holding in his right hand. He was holding a shovel. A small, foldable entrenching tool, the kind soldiers and campers use, and the blade of the shovel was caked with dark, wet earth. Corbin stared at the image, his breath caught in his throat. The scratches, the shovel, the look on his face. It wasn't the face of a boy whose girlfriend had just run off. It was the face of a boy who had just buried a body. "My God," Corbin whispered. "We've got him." The escalation was immediate and brutal. Armed with the photograph, Corbin got a warrant to search Liam Evans's life. Not just his house, but his office, his financials, his entire digital footprint. It was a forensic deep dive into the soul of a killer. They found things, small, damning things that, when pieced together, painted a terrifying picture. In the back of a filing cabinet in his home office, tucked away in a folder marked Old Tax Records, they found a credit card statement from October 2006. On it, a single charge from a week before the camping trip, a purchase from an Army surplus store, downtown. The item, one military-style entrenching tool, a shovel. They searched the grounds of his house, a sprawling property that sloped down to the river. Near an old, gnarled oak tree at the edge of the property line, a cadaver dog got a hit. The forensics team started digging. A few feet down, they found a small, rotted canvas bag. Inside was a collection of trophies, a silver locket with the initial J engraved on it, a single, small, pearl earring, and a lock of dark brown hair, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Jessica's hair. He had kept souvenirs. The public humiliation was relentless. The photo of him with the shovel was leaked, and it became the defining image of the case. It was on every news channel, every website, every newspaper front page. The handsome, confident doctor was gone, replaced by a wild-eyed boy with a dirty shovel and a terrible secret. Liam became a prisoner in his own home. He couldn't go outside. Without being swarmed, he stopped sleeping. He drank heavily, his days blurring into a paranoid alcohol-fueled haze. He would sit for hours in his darkened living room, watching the news, watching his life being torn apart, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage. He had been so careful, he had been so smart. How could this be happening? The final betrayal, the one that broke him, came from his own wife, Claire, the senator's daughter, the woman whose entire identity was built on a foundation of propriety and public image, could no longer stand the stain of his scandal. One evening, as he sat, slumped in his armchair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, she walked into the room, her face pale and set. She was flanked by two large, grim-faced men in dark suits. Her father's security detail. "What is this?" Liam slurred, trying to stand. "I'm leaving, Liam," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "The children are already at my father's house. These gentlemen will escort you out of the house. My lawyer will be in touch with yours." "You can't do this," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "This is my house. You're my wife." "No," she said, her voice as cold as the grave he had dug for Jessica. "I was the wife of Dr. Liam Evans. I have no idea who you are." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, a sound like nails being hammered into a coffin. The two men moved towards him. Liam looked from their impassive faces to the life he had built, the life that was now being taken from him. The rage that he had kept buried for 19 years, the same cold, reptilian rage that had wrapped his hands around Jessica's throat, finally erupted. He let out a primal scream and lunged, not at the men, but at a large framed wedding photo. On the mantel, he smashed it to the ground, the glass shattering. He tore at the curtains, ripped books from the shelves, his hands that were trained to heal now instruments of pure, nihilistic destruction. He was destroying the evidence of his own life, trying to erase the man he had pretended to be. The security men subdued him easily, pinning him to the floor amidst the wreckage of his perfect life. As they dragged him out of the house, out past the manicured lawns and the imported Japanese maples, he saw the flashing lights. Red and blue. A fleet of police cars was pulling into his driveway. Blocking the exit. Detective Miles Corbin got out of the lead car, his face grim, his eyes hard. He walked towards Liam, the gravel crunching under his boots. He didn't look at the mess, the broken man being held down by two private security guards. He looked right into Liam's eyes. "Liam Evans," Corbin said, his voice ringing with the cold, clear authority of the law. You're under arrest for the murder of Jessica Miller. As the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, the cold metal biting into his skin, Liam Evans finally understood. The boy with the shovel had never really gone away. He had just been waiting, buried under 19 years of lies, for the world to finally dig him up. The discovery of the shovel photograph and the trophy bag was the crack in the dam. Now, the floodgates opened. The full, horrifying scope of Liam's psychopathy, hidden for so long beneath a veneer of charm and success, was laid bare. The plot twist wasn't just that he had killed Jessica. It was how meticulously he had planned it, and how close he had come to getting away with it forever. The key was the journal. With the new evidence corroborating Maya's story, the forensics team at the state lab redoubled their efforts. Using the enhanced photograph as a guide, they could now look for specific context clues in the water-stained pages. Words and phrases that had been illegible before suddenly snapped into focus. And what they revealed was a story far darker than a simple crime of passion. It was a narrative of calculated, sadistic control. Jessica's final entries were a chilling testament to her terror. She wasn't writing about a lover's quarrel. She was documenting a hostage situation. October 12th, he won't let me leave. He says we need to work through this. He smiles when he says it, but his eyes are empty. He took my phone. He told me if I try to run, he'll find me. He said he knows people. He said he can make me disappear. October 14th, he hit me. Again today, because I looked at the waiter for too long. He waited until we got back to his apartment. He apologized afterwards. He cried. He said he loves me so much that it makes him crazy. He said it's my fault for making him feel this way. I think I'm starting to believe him. October 17th, he bought a shovel. I saw it in the back of his Jeep. I asked him what it was for. He said we were going camping. A special trip, just the two of us. Back to the place on the mountain. He said we needed to bury the past and start over. The way he said bury, my blood went cold. I have to pretend. I have to smile and act excited. It's the only way I'll survive. He's watching me. Write this. I have to stop. The journal was a confession, not from the killer, but from the victim. It was her voice, reaching across 2 decades from a shallow grave, to tell the world that her death was not an accident or a mistake. It was an execution. The conspiracy, it turned out, was not a network of powerful people protecting Liam. It was a conspiracy of one, a meticulous, patient, and utterly ruthless campaign of psychological warfare, waged by a budding psychopath against a girl who had dared to try and leave him. The camping trip was never meant to be a reconciliation. It was the final act of a play he had written and directed, and the shovel was his star prop. But there was another twist, a final sickening revelation that came not from the lab, but from another witness, one who had been hiding in plain sight for 19 years. Liam's father. Dr. Alistair Evans was a titan of the Portland medical community, a renowned cardiologist with a reputation for being as brilliant as he was cold and demanding. He and Liam had been estranged for years, a fact Liam had always attributed to professional jealousy. The truth was far more sinister. When Detective Corbin and his team showed up at Alistair Evans's stately home in the West Hills, they were expecting a fight. They were expecting a father fiercely defending his son, a man who would use his considerable power and influence to obstruct the investigation. Instead, they found a broken old man sitting alone in a library that smelled of leather and regret. Knew this day would come, Alistair said, his voice a dry whisper. He didn't even look at the warrant. He just stared out the window, at the grey, weeping sky. I've been waiting for it for 19 years. He told them his story. He had known his son was dangerous. He had seen the signs from an early age. The cruelty to animals, the manipulative lies, the chilling lack of empathy. He had tried to get him help, but Liam was too smart, too good at mimicking human emotion. He knew what the psychologists wanted to hear. On the night Jessica disappeared, Liam had come home. He had been covered in mud and scratches, his eyes glittering with a strange, manic energy. He had confessed everything to his father, The fight, the rage, the feeling of her life slipping away in his hands. He had described burying her body with a calm, chilling detachment. Alistair had been faced with an impossible choice: turn in his only son, or become an accessory to murder. He chose a third path. A path of monstrous, misguided protection. He had helped Liam clean up. He had coached him on what to say to the police. He had used his influence to cast doubt on the stories of Jessica's friends, to paint Maya as an unreliable witness. He had helped his son construct the lie that would become his life. I thought I could contain him, Alistair said, his voice cracking, tears finally tracing paths through the wrinkles on his face. I thought, if I helped him build a new life, a good life, a life of saving people, that it would somehow atone for what he did, that the monster would be caged by the good doctor. He let out a dry, rattling sob. But the monster was the doctor, the whole time. The bombshell was a recording. Alistair, a man who trusted no one, not even his own son, had recorded their conversation that night. He had hidden the microcassette tape in a safe deposit box, a piece of insurance he prayed he would never have to use. It was his confession. As much as it was Liam's, Corbin and his team listened to the tape in stunned silence. The quality was poor, full of hiss and static, but the voices were clear. A young Liam, his voice high and breathless with excitement, describing the murder in gruesome detail, and Alistair, his voice low and urgent, telling him exactly what to do, how to lie, how to survive. Liam. She wouldn't shut up, crying and begging. It was pathetic. So I made her shut up. It was so quiet afterwards. Just the wind in the trees. It was peaceful. Alistair, listen to me, son. You fell. You were arguing, and you slipped and hit your head. The scratches are from the fall. She ran off. You were distraught. You understand. You are the victim here. The tape was the nail in the coffin. It was the irrefutable, undeniable proof. The case was no longer about a he said she said from 2 decades ago. It was a documented conspiracy to cover up a murder. The stakes had shifted from the personal pain of a few broken families to a public scandal that would rock the city to its core. When the existence of the tape was made public, the last of Liam's defenders fell silent. The narrative was no longer about a tragic love story gone wrong. It was about a monster and the man who created him. The public's fascination turned to outrage. How could a man like that be allowed to operate on children? How could a father be so morally bankrupt as to help his son cover up such a heinous crime? The tension cranked to its absolute maximum. The trial was set to be the biggest in Oregon's history. The media called it the trial of the 2 doctors. Liam, facing a life sentence, was a cornered animal. His charm was gone, replaced by a sullen, simmering rage. He fired his high-powered lawyer and decided to represent himself, a final, desperate act of narcissistic arrogance. He was convinced he was smarter than everyone in the room. He was convinced he could still win. In his jail cell, he meticulously prepared. He studied law books. He rehearsed his opening statement. He planned his cross-examination of the witnesses. He would tear them apart. He would expose their lies, their faulty memories, their vendettas. He would expose Maya as a delusional stalker. He would expose Ethan as a jealous rival. He would expose his own father as a senile old man trying to settle a score. He had no idea that the prosecution's star witness wasn't going to be Maya, or Ethan, or even his father. He had no idea that Detective Corbin had saved the biggest plot twist for the trial itself. He had found one more clue, one more piece of the puzzle. Hidden in the digital ether for 19 years. In the early days of the investigation, Corbin's team had seized all of Liam's old electronics from his father's house. Among them was an old, clunky desktop computer from 2006. A forensic tech, a young genius fresh out of college, had been tasked with the near-impossible job of recovering data from the ancient hard drive. For weeks, he had found nothing but old college papers and downloaded music. But then, buried deep in a fragmented, corrupted cache file from an old AOL Instant Messenger program, he found it. A conversation. A log of a chat between Liam, username PDXPremed, and Jessica, user name Jessamiller86. The chat was time-stamped the morning of the camping trip. It was their final conversation, and it changed everything. JESSI Miller, 86. I don't want to go, Liam, I'm scared. PDX Pre-Med, don't be, it's going to be perfect. A new beginning for us. JESSI Miller, 86. It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like an end. PDX Pre-Med. It is an end, Jess. An end to all the fighting. An end to all the tears. I promise. After this weekend, you'll never have to be scared or sad again. Corbin read the transcript, and a chill went down his spine. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. A promise from a killer to his victim. And he was going to read it to a jury. The stage was set. The players were in place. The cinematic payoff was about to begin. The courtroom was a pressure cooker. Every seat was filled. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy with the ghosts of the past. On one side sat the prosecution, led by a sharp, no-nonsense DA named Helen Ramirez, with Detective Corbin at her side, his face a stoic mask. On the other side sat Liam Evans, acting as his own counsel. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly coiffed. He looked cool, confident, almost bored. It was the performance of his life, and he was playing the role of the wronged man to perfection. The first few days of the trial were a blur of procedural motions and dry testimony. Forensics experts testified about the hyoid bone, the handprint, the shovel. Friends of Jessica testified about Liam's temper, their voices trembling with 19-year-old fear. Liam cross-examined them with a surgeon's precision. His questions designed to pick apart their memories, to make them seem unreliable, hysterical. He was good, he was dangerously good. A palpable sense of doubt began to creep into the courtroom. Maybe he was innocent. Maybe this was all a terrible mistake. Then, Maya took the stand. She was no longer the frightened girl from the diner in Arizona. She was composed, her voice clear and steady. She looked directly at Liam as she told her story. She didn't cry, she didn't waver, she just stated the facts, the bruises, the fear. The camera. When it was Liam's turn to cross-examine her, a hush fell over the court. This was the confrontation everyone had been waiting for. He approached the witness stand, his movements slow and deliberate, like a panther stalking its prey. Ms. Peters, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. Or should I say, Maya. You were in love with Jessica, weren't you? Maya blinked, but her composure didn't crack. I loved her as a friend. As more than a friend, I think. Liam pressed on, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. You were obsessed with her. You were jealous of our relationship, isn't it true that you saw me as a rival for her affections? That's not true. Isn't it true, he continued, his voice rising, that you doctored that photograph? That you used your so-called artistic skills to fabricate a scene that never happened? All to frame the man who took your precious Jessica away from you. It was a brilliant, vicious strategy. To paint Maya as a spurned obsessive lesbian, a trope as old as time. But Ramirez was ready. On redirect, she simply asked, Maya, did you own a shovel in October of 2006? No, did you? Own a credit card with which to purchase one? No. Did you have a lock of Jessica's hair tied with a blue ribbon buried in your backyard? Objection, Liam shouted, jumping to his feet. Relevance. Overruled, the judge said, his voice flat. The witness will answer. No, Maya said, her eyes locking with Liam's. I didn't. The tide had turned. The next day, Alistair Evans was called to the stand. He looked like a ghost, his frail body lost in his expensive suit. He could barely look at his son. His testimony was a monotone confession of his own monstrous failure. As a father, when the prosecution played the microcassette recording, a collective gasp went through the courtroom. Liam's voice, young and arrogant, filled the air, describing the murder of his girlfriend with chilling sociopathic glee. Liam sat at the defense table, his face ashen. The mask was gone. For the first time, he looked like what he was, a cornered killer. During his cross-examination of his own father, his composure finally shattered. His questions became frantic, rambling accusations. You always hated me, he screamed, his voice cracking. You were jealous of my success. You did this to destroy me. Alistair just looked at him, his eyes full of a terrible, bottomless pity. No, son, he whispered, his voice hoarse. You did this to yourself. It was over. Everyone knew it. But the cinematic payoff, the moment that would be replayed on the news for years to come, was still to come. The prosecution had one final witness. The prosecution calls Dr. Liam Evans to the stand. Ramirez announced. A murmur went through the courtroom. It was a highly unusual high-risk move. But it wasn't a move of desperation. It was a checkmate. Liam, as his own lawyer, had a choice. He could refuse to testify, invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But to a jury that had just heard him describe a murder on tape, that silence would be an admission of guilt. Or, he could take the stand and subject himself to cross-examination by a prosecutor who knew every single one of his lies. He was trapped. He chose to testify. His arrogance was his undoing. He walked to the witness stand, his stride confident, his head held high. He still believed he was the smartest man in the room. Ramirez let him talk. She let him spin his web of lies, his story of a tragic misunderstanding, of a troubled girlfriend who had run away. He was eloquent, charming, convincing. He almost had the jury believing him again. Then, Ramirez walked to her table and picked up a single piece of paper. The transcript of the AOL Instant Messenger chat. Dr. Evans, she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. I want to read you something. A conversation you had with Jessica Miller, on the morning of October 21, 2006. Your screen name was PDX Premed. Hers was Jessa Miller, 86. Do you recall this conversation? Liam's face went blank. He had no memory of it. It was a ghost from a machine. A digital echo he had forgotten existed. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. But the first crack appeared in his composure. Ramirez began to read. Jessa Miller, 86. I don't want to go. Liam, I'm scared. PDX Premed. Don't be. It's going to be perfect. A new beginning for us. With each word, the color drained from Liam's face. He was staring at Ramirez as if she were a sorceress, conjuring spells from the air. Jessa Miller, 86. It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like an end. Ramirez paused, letting the words hang in the silent courtroom. She looked up from the paper, her eyes locking onto Liam's. And then you wrote this. Dr. Evans, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It is an end, Jess. An end to all the fighting. An end to all the tears, I promise. After this weekend, you'll never have to be scared or sad again. She put the paper down. What did you mean by that, Dr. Evans? What kind of an end were you promising, Jessica? Liam stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. The entire edifice of his life, the 19 years of lies, the carefully constructed persona of the good doctor, the loving husband, the respected member of the community. All of it came crashing down in that one, silent moment. The jury saw it. Everyone in the courtroom saw it. The mask didn't just crack. It disintegrated, revealing the hollow reptilian monster beneath. He lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a primal scream of pure narcissistic rage. Launched himself from the witness stand, his hands outstretched, his face a grotesque mask of fury. He was going for Ramirez. He was going to make her shut up, just like he had made Jessica shut up, but he never reached her. Detective Corbin, who had been sitting coiled like a spring, moved faster than anyone thought a man his size could move. He intercepted Liam in mid-air, tackling him to the ground in a tangle of limbs and tailored fabric. The courtroom erupted into chaos. People screamed. The judge hammered his gavel, his voice lost in the pandemonium. Cameras flashed, capturing the image that would define the trial. The handsome, respected surgeon, his face contorted in a demonic snarl, being pinned to the floor of a courtroom, still trying to claw his way towards the woman who had exposed him. It was public justice, in its most raw and brutal form. It was a live-streamed exorcism. The monster had not only been unmasked, he had been forced to show his true face to the entire world. As they dragged him out of the courtroom, kicking and screaming, his final words were not a plea of innocence, but a curse, a final, impotent threat from a king who had lost his kingdom. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Justice for Jessica Miller had been a long time coming, but when it arrived, it was absolute. The emotional aftermath was not one of clean, simple healing. It was a landscape of craters and aftershocks, a quiet, lingering sorrow. The explosive climax of the trial gave way to the haunting reality of what had been lost. Liam Evans was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his days in a concrete box, the brilliant surgeon's hands that had once held the power of life and death, now useless. He became a ghost in the system, his name, a byword for hubris and evil. His perfect house on the river was sold, its floor-to-ceiling windows now looking out on a life that no longer belonged to him. His children, shielded by their grandfather's senatorial power, were given new names, new identities. Their father's legacy a poison they would have to carry for the rest of their lives. Alistair Evans, charged as an accessory after the fact, pleaded guilty. Given his age and his cooperation, he was spared prison time, sentenced instead to house arrest. He lived out his remaining years in his mausoleum of a library, a prisoner of his own guilt. He died 2 years after the trial, alone, his death certificate listing heart failure as the cause. But those who knew him knew he had died of a broken soul. For the people who had loved Jessica, the verdict was not a victory, but a release. It was the closing of a wound that had been left open for 19 years. Her parents, now old and grey, held a memorial service for her. It wasn't a funeral, they insisted. It was a celebration of the life she had lived, not the death she had suffered. They stood in a small, sun-dappled clearing, not far from where she had been found, and they read her poetry, told stories of her laughter, and remembered the bright, vibrant girl she had been. Ben Carter, the drone operator who had started it all, was there. He stood at the back, feeling like an intruder, but knowing he had to come. He had quit his job. He couldn't look at the world through a lens anymore. He had sold his drone. The forest was no longer a place of beauty for him. It was a place of secrets, a place where the earth held its breath. He had moved to the city, trading the silence of the trees for the noise of humanity. But he could never escape the image of that skeletal foot. The flicker of blue nylon that had changed so many lives. Maya was there too. She had moved back to Oregon. The trial had been an ordeal, but it had also been a liberation. She had spoken her truth, and the world had finally listened. The guilt she had carried for so long had been lifted, replaced by a profound, aching sadness for the friend she had lost. She had started a small foundation in Jessica's name, a charity that helped young women escape abusive relationships. She was using her voice, the voice that had been silenced for so long, to make sure that no one else's story ended like Jessica's. After the service, Maya walked away from the crowd, drawn to a small, simple grave marker that had been placed. At the edge of the clearing, it wasn't made of marble or granite. It was a simple, rough-hewn slab of local stone. On it were carved Jessica's name, her dates, and a single line from one of her poems, a line from the waterlogged journal that had been her final, desperate message in a bottle. Even in the darkest woods, a single star is a promise of the dawn. Maya traced the letters with her fingers. She thought about the 19 years of silence, the 19 years of lies, the 19 years that a monster had walked free, hiding behind a mask of respectability. She thought about the cost of the truth, the lives that had been shattered, the innocence that had been lost. She looked up, through the canopy of the ancient firs, at the sliver of blue sky beyond. The wind whispered through the trees, a sound that was no longer menacing, but mournful, like a long, slow exhalation. The world would move on. The headlines would fade. New scandals would erupt. But here, in this quiet corner of the woods, the ghost of Jessica Miller could finally rest. The dawn had been a long time coming, but it had come, and in the quiet, bittersweet peace of the aftermath, there was a sense of an ending. A tragic, haunting, and necessary end. The emotional echo of a life cut short, and a truth, finally, brought into the light.